The sound of shattering glass pierced the air, followed by my mother-in-law's shrill voice. "Harper, where are you? This is unacceptable." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath before stepping out of my office and into the chaos of the hotel lobby. Madeline stood there, hands on her hips, surrounded by a sea of broken champagne flutes. "What happened?" I asked, forcing a calm tone. Madeline's eyes narrowed. "What happened? Your incompetent staff. That's what happened. They can't even set up a simple champagne tower without disaster striking." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that we weren't exactly a five-star resort. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Madeline. We'll clean this up right away." "See that you do," she sniffed. "And make sure it's perfect for my book club meeting this afternoon. I won't have my friends thinking my son married into some second-rate establishment." As if on cue, Paul appeared, looking flustered. "Mom, what's going on? Harper, are you okay?" I plastered on a smile. "Everything's fine, honey. Just a little accident." Madeline scoffed. "Accident? More like gross negligence. Paul, darling, you really need to have a word with your wife about how she's running this place." Paul's face reddened. "Mom, please. Harper's doing her best. We all are, especially with everything that's been going on." I felt a twinge of gratitude, quickly overshadowed by Madeline's next words. "Oh, yes, I'm sure it's been difficult," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "What with Harper's condition and all?" The room went silent. I felt the blood drain from my face as Paul turned to me, confusion etched across his features. "What condition?" he asked slowly. Madeline's eyes widened in mock surprise. "Oh dear, did I say something I shouldn't have? I just assumed, given how tired you've been looking lately, Harper." I couldn't breathe. The secret I'd been carefully guarding, the diagnosis I'd received just weeks ago and hadn't yet found the courage to share with Paul, it was all crumbling around me. "Harper?" Paul's voice sounded far away. "What's she talking about?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could Madeline know, and how dare she reveal it like this, in front of everyone? "It's nothing," I managed to croak out. "Madeline's just exaggerating." But the damage was done. I could see the hurt in Paul's eyes, the betrayal. Madeline clucked her tongue. Now, dear, there's no need to lie. We're all family here. Paul deserves to know if his wife is—" "That's enough." The booming voice cut through the tension like a knife. We all turned to see Victor, Madeline's husband, striding into the lobby. "Madeline, that's quite enough," he repeated, his tone brooking no argument. "This is neither the time nor the place for such discussions." Madeline had the grace to look chastened, but the triumphant glint in her eye told me this was far from over. Victor turned to me, his expression softening. "Harper, I apologize for my wife's behavior. Perhaps we should all take a moment to cool down." I nodded numbly, grateful for the intervention, but knowing it was too late. The cat was out of the bag, and I'd have to face the consequences. As the group dispersed, Paul caught my arm. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Now." I swallowed hard, following him to a quiet corner of the lobby. The shards of broken glass crunched under our feet, a fitting metaphor for the mess my life had suddenly become. As I prepared to face my husband's questions and Madeline's smug satisfaction, one thought echoed in my mind: this ends now. No more playing nice, no more letting Madeline walk all over me. It was time to take back control of my life, my marriage, and my hotel, no matter the cost. I stared at the spreadsheet on my computer screen, the numbers blurring together as I tried to make sense of our financial situation. The pandemic had hit us hard, and Madeline's recent antics weren't helping. A soft knock on my office door pulled me from my thoughts. "Harper?" Paul's voice was hesitant. "Can we talk?" I sighed, bracing myself. "Come in." He entered, closing the door behind him. The air between us felt thick with unspoken words and lingering hurt. "I'm sorry about yesterday," he began. "My mother, she had no right to reveal your condition like that." I met his gaze, steeling myself. "No, she didn't. But Paul, I'm sorry too. I should have told you sooner." He nodded, sinking into the chair across from me. "How bad is it?" I swallowed hard. "It's treatable, but it's going to be a long road." Paul reached across the desk, taking my hand. "We'll face it together, I promise." Just then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and groaned. "It's the health department. They're coming for a surprise inspection tomorrow." Paul's eyes widened. "Tomorrow? But we're not ready. Half the staff is out sick, and with the new regulations—" I know, I cut him off. But we don't have a choice. We have to make this work. Paul, if we fail this inspection, we're done. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. What do you need me to do? I stood up, my mind already racing. Call your parents. We need all hands on deck. Paul hesitated. Are you sure that's a good idea? After yesterday, we don't have a choice, I repeated. Your mother might drive me crazy, but she knows how to put on a show. We need that right now. He nodded, pulling out his phone. As he dialed, I headed out to rally the remaining staff. We had less than 24 hours to turn this place around. The next morning, I was running on caffeine and sheer determination. We'd worked through the night, scrubbing every surface, reorganizing storage areas, and implementing new safety protocols. As I did a final walkthrough, Madeline appeared at my elbow. Harper, dear, don't you think the lobby could use a bit more pizzazz? First impressions are everything, you know? I bit back a retort. Madeline, we're in the middle of a pandemic. The health inspector isn't looking for pizzazz. They're looking for safety and compliance. She waved a hand dismissively. Nonsense. A little glamour never hurt anyone. Now, where did I put those silk flower arrangements? Before I could stop her, she was off, leaving me to deal with the approaching inspector. I plastered on my best professional smile as I greeted him. Welcome to Sunset Inn. I'm Harper, the owner. We're ready for your inspection. The next 2 hours were a blur of checklist items, pointed questions, and barely concealed anxiety. Just as we were wrapping up in the kitchen, a commotion from the lobby caught our attention. What in the world? The inspector muttered as we hurried to investigate. The scene that greeted us was pure chaos. Madeline stood atop a stepladder, attempting to hang an enormous crystal chandelier. Silk flowers and glitter covered every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of what I could only assume was her signature perfume. Mother, what are you doing? Paul exclaimed, rushing to steady the ladder. Madeline beamed. Just adding a touch of class, darling. This dreary place needed a lift. I turned to the inspector, my heart sinking. I can explain. But his expression stopped me short. To my utter disbelief, he was smiling. Mrs. Harper, he said, I've seen a lot of hotels trying to adapt to these difficult times, but I've never seen one with such enthusiasm. He chuckled, shaking his head. You pass, with flying colors, I might add. As he left, I stood there in stunned silence. Paul wrapped an arm around me, equally shocked. We did it, he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. We had survived, against all odds. But as I looked at Madeline, still perched atop her ladder and basking in her perceived victory, I knew our troubles were far from over. This was just the beginning. I was knee-deep in paperwork when my office door flew open, revealing a beaming Madeline. My stomach dropped, recognizing the look of self-satisfaction on her face. Harper, darling, I have the most wonderful news. I braced myself. What is it, Madeline? She clasped her hands together, practically vibrating with excitement. I've invited the ladies from my social club to stay at the hotel next weekend. Isn't that marvelous? My pen clattered to the desk. You did what? Oh, don't look so shocked, she waved dismissively. It's perfect timing. The hotel could use the business, and my friends are dying for a getaway. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice level. Madeline, we can't just... Nonsense. It's all arranged. 10 rooms, full service, the works. They're so looking forward to it. Before I could protest further, Paul appeared in the doorway. What's going on? Madeline turned to her son, beaming. Paul, darling, I was just telling Harper about the wonderful favor I've done for the hotel. My social club will be here next weekend. Paul's eyes widened, darting between his mother and me. Mom, that's a big decision. Did you discuss this with Harper first? Of course not, I muttered under my breath. Madeline's smile faltered slightly. Well, I assumed it would be fine. We're family, after all. I stood up, my patience wearing thin. Madeline, we can't just host a large group without proper planning. We have protocols in place, staffing issues to consider. Oh, pish-posh, she interrupted. I'm sure you can handle it. Besides, these ladies are used to the very best. It'll be good for the hotel's reputation. I felt a headache coming on. Our reputation is fine. What we need is to follow safety guidelines and... Safety, 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 Madeline sighed dramatically. You're always so focused on the negatives, Harper. This is an opportunity. Paul stepped between us, sensing the rising tension. Look, why don't we all take a moment to discuss this calmly? Mom, Harper's right that we need to consider the logistics. Madeline's eyes narrowed. I see. So you're taking her side now? It's not about sides, I interjected. It's about running a business responsibly. A business that wouldn't even exist without our family's support, Madeline shot back. The room fell silent. Paul looked stricken, while I felt as if I'd been slapped. Mom, Paul said quietly, that's not fair. Madeline had the grace to look slightly abashed, but she didn't back down. I'm sorry, but it's true, and now I'm trying to help, and all I get is resistance. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 silently. When I opened them, I forced a tight smile. Fine, the social club can come. Both Madeline and Paul looked surprised. Really? They said in unison. I nodded, my mind already racing. Yes, but on one condition. Madeline raised an eyebrow. And what's that? You help, I said firmly. Not just with planning, but with the actual work. If you want to host this event, you'll be part of the staff for the weekend. Paul's jaw dropped. Madeline looked as if I'd suggested she scrub toilets with a toothbrush. That's absurd, she sputtered. I'm a guest here, not an employee. I stood my ground. Those are my terms. Take it or leave it. Madeline's eyes darted to Paul, clearly expecting him to intervene. But to my surprise, he stayed silent, watching the exchange with a mix of apprehension and... was that admiration? After a long moment, Madeline straightened her shoulders. Fine, she said coolly. If that's what it takes to show you how things should be done around here, I accept. As she swept out of the room, Paul turned to me with a look of disbelief. Harper, are you sure about this? I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. No, I admitted. But something has to change, Paul. And if this is what it takes to make your mother understand what we deal with every day, then so be it. Little did I know, I had just set in motion a chain of events that would change everything, for better or worse. I paced our bedroom, my frustration reaching a boiling point. Paul sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. I can't take it anymore, Paul, I said, my voice trembling. Your mother is destroying everything we've worked for. He looked up, his eyes weary. Harper, I know she can be difficult, but... Difficult, I laughed bitterly. She's a nightmare. She's undermining my authority, spending money we don't have, and now this ridiculous social club weekend? It's too much. Paul stood, reaching for me. I'll talk to her, I promise. We'll figure this out. I stepped back, shaking my head. That's not enough anymore. You've been saying that for years, and nothing changes. I need you to stand up to her, Paul. Really stand up to her. His face fell. She's my mother, Harper. What do you expect me to do? I expect you to support your wife, I snapped. To put our marriage, our business first, but you never do. You always cave to her demands. Paul's expression hardened. That's not fair. I'm trying to balance everyone's needs here. Well, you're failing, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them, and I'm not sure how much longer I can do this. The silence that followed was deafening. Paul stared at me, shock and hurt etched across his face. What are you saying? He whispered. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'm saying that if something doesn't change, and soon, I don't know if our marriage will survive this. Paul stumbled back as if I'd struck him. Harper, you can't mean that. We've been through so much together. Exactly, I said, my voice softening. We've been through so much. The pandemic, my health scare, the constant struggle to keep this whole afloat. But your mother, she's the one thing that might break us, Paul. He sank back onto the bed, looking lost. I don't know what to do, he admitted. I love you, Harper, more than anything. But she's my mother. I can't just cut her out of our lives. I sat beside him, taking his hand. I'm not asking you to cut her out. I'm asking you to set boundaries, to make it clear that our marriage, our business, comes first. Paul nodded slowly. You're right. I know you're right. It's hard. I know, I said softly, but we can't go on like this. Something has to give. Just then a commotion from downstairs caught our attention. We exchanged a glance before hurrying to investigate. We found Madeline in the lobby, surrounded by a group of well-dressed women. My heart sank as I realized her social club had arrived early. Oh, there you are, Madeline trilled, waving us over. Ladies, this is my son Paul and his wife Harper. They'll be taking care of us this weekend. I plastered on a smile, even as panic rose in my chest. We weren't prepared for this. Not yet. One of the women stepped forward, eyeing me critically. Madeline tells us you run this charming little hotel. How quaint. I felt Paul stiffen beside me, but before he could speak, I jumped in. "We're so pleased to have you all here. If you'll just give us a moment, we'll get everything sorted for your stay." As I turned to Paul, ready to start damage control, I caught sight of Madeline's smug expression. She'd planned this, I realized. She'd brought them early on purpose, to catch us off guard. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I was done playing nice, done trying to accommodate her impossible demands. I met Paul's gaze, my decision made. "It's time," I said quietly. "Either we take control now, or we lose everything." Paul hesitated for a split second, then nodded. "You're right," he said, squeezing my hand. "Let's do this." As we turned to face Madeline and her friends, I felt a surge of determination. This was it, the moment that would make or break us. And I was ready for battle. The lobby buzzed with the chatter of Madeline's friends, their voices grating on my already frayed nerves. I plastered on a smile, determined to maintain a professional facade despite the chaos unfolding around me. "Ladies, if you'll follow me, I'll show you to your rooms," I said, gesturing towards the elevator. Madeline stepped forward, linking arms with one of her friends. "Oh, don't bother yourself, Harper, dear. I know this place like the back of my hand. I'll take care of it." I felt my smile falter. "That's really not necessary, Madeline. As the hotel manager, it's my responsibility to—" "Nonsense," she interrupted, waving dismissively. "You must have more important things to do. Come along, ladies." As Madeline led her entourage away, I caught Paul's eye. He looked torn, clearly sensing my frustration but hesitant to intervene. I shook my head slightly, silently urging him to let it go. For now. The next few hours were a whirlwind of demands and complaints. Madeline's friends wanted room upgrades, special meal preparations, and amenities we simply didn't offer. With each request, I felt my control slipping away. "Harper, darling," Madeline's voice rang out as I passed the hotel bar. "Be a dear and bring us a round of martinis, oh, and make sure they're made with the top-shelf gin. You know the one." I gritted my teeth. "Madeline, I'm not a bartender, and we don't carry that particular brand of gin." She tutted disapprovingly. "Well, that's rather short-sighted, isn't it? A hotel of this caliber should be prepared for discerning guests." Her friends murmured in agreement, casting judgmental glances my way. I felt my cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "I'll see what I can do," I managed, retreating to the kitchen. As I leaned against the cool stainless steel counter, trying to regain my composure, I overheard Madeline's voice drifting in from the dining room. "Really, it's a shame. Paul could have done so much better. The girl simply doesn't understand how to run a proper establishment. If only he'd listened to me and married Caroline instead. Her family owns that lovely chain of luxury resorts, you know." My blood ran cold. I'd always suspected Madeline disapproved of me, but to hear her speak so callously about our marriage, it was devastating. Just then, Paul entered the kitchen, his expression concerned. "Harper, are you okay? You look pale." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. How could I tell him what I'd just heard? Would he even believe me? Before I could decide, a commotion erupted from the dining room. We rushed out to find one of Madeline's friends standing on a chair, shrieking and pointing at the floor. "A mouse! I saw a mouse!" she wailed. Madeline turned to me, her eyes flashing with triumph. "Well, Harper, what do you have to say for yourself? This is absolutely unacceptable." I felt all eyes on me, waiting for my response. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I was done playing nice, done trying to please everyone at the expense of my own dignity and sanity. "You're right, Madeline," I said, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. "This is unacceptable, but not because of a mouse that may or may not exist. It's unacceptable because you've turned what should have been a pleasant weekend into a nightmare for everyone involved." Gasps echoed around the room. Paul stepped forward, placing a hand on my arm. "Harper, maybe we should." I shook him off gently. "No, Paul, it's time for some hard truths." I turned back to Madeline and her stunned friends. "This hotel may not meet your exacting standards, but it's our home and our livelihood, and from this moment on, things are going to change." As I stood there, heart pounding, I realized I'd reached a point of no return. The next few minutes would determine the future of not just the hotel, but my marriage and family as well. And I was ready to fight for all of it. The morning of checkout arrived. and I steeled myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. I'd spent the night poring over the hotel's finances, tallying up every extravagant expense Madeline and her friends had racked up. The final number made my stomach churn. As I approached the front desk, I saw Madeline holding court with her friends, all of them laughing and chatting as if they didn't have a care in the world. Paul stood off to the side, his expression a mix of concern and resignation. "Ladies," I said, forcing a smile, "I hope you enjoyed your stay. If you're ready to check out, I have your bills prepared." Madeline waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Harper dear, don't be silly. You know we won't be paying for this little getaway. It's family after all." I took a deep breath, my hands shaking slightly as I held out the itemized bill. "I'm sorry, Madeline, but that's not how this works. The hotel is a business, not a charity. Here's the total for your stay." Her eyes widened as she glanced at the number. "This is outrageous. I won't pay a cent of this ridiculous amount." "Madeline," I said, my voice firm, "you and your friends consumed thousands of dollars worth of food, drink, and services. We can't afford to comp all of that, especially not in this economy." She turned to Paul, her face flushing with anger. "Paul, darling, control your wife. This is unacceptable behavior." I felt a surge of relief as Paul stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. "No, Mom. Harper's right. You need to pay for what you've used." Madeline's jaw dropped. "I can't believe this. After everything I've done for you both, for this hotel." "What exactly have you done, Madeline?" I interrupted, my patience finally snapping. "Besides criticize, undermine, and take advantage of our hospitality?" The lobby fell silent, all eyes on us. Madeline's friends shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure whether to intervene. "How dare you?" Madeline hissed. "I've supported this hotel from the beginning. I've brought in high-profile guests. You've brought in your friends, who expect everything for free," I countered. "You've spread rumors about our service, you've insulted our staff, and worst of all, you've tried to drive a wedge between Paul and me at every opportunity." Paul's grip on my shoulder tightened. "Is this true, Mom?" Madeline's face paled. "Of course not. I would never." "I heard you," I said quietly, "in the dining room, talking about how Paul should have married someone else, someone from a proper family." The hurt in Paul's eyes was almost unbearable. "Mom, how could you?" Madeline looked frantically between us, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. I only want what's best for you, darling. This hotel, this life, it's beneath you." "That's enough," Paul said, his voice hard. "You need to leave, Mom, and you need to pay your bill." For a moment I thought Madeline might actually comply, but then her eyes narrowed, a cold smile spreading across her face. "Fine. You want to play hardball? Let's play. I'll pay the bill, every last cent. And then I'll call in the loan I gave you to start this place." My blood ran cold. "What loan?" Paul's face had gone ashen. "Mom, you can't." "Oh, but I can," Madeline said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Did your dear wife never tell you, Paul? This hotel wouldn't even exist without my money. And now I think it's time I got my investment back." The room spun around me as the implications sank in. If Madeline called in that loan, we'd lose everything. The hotel, our home, our entire livelihood. I turned to Paul, searching his face for some sign, some solution, but he looked as lost as I felt. In that moment, standing in the lobby of the hotel we'd poured our hearts and souls into, I realized we were teetering on the edge of losing it all, and I had no idea how to pull us back from the brink. The lobby had fallen into a tense silence, the weight of Madeline's threat hanging heavy in the air. I felt as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice, one wrong move away from losing everything we'd worked so hard to build. Suddenly, the front doors swung open and a familiar figure strode in. Victor, Madeline's husband, his face set in a grim expression. "What in God's name is going on here?" he demanded, taking in the scene before him. Madeline's demeanor instantly shifted, a saccharine smile replacing her scowl. "Victor, darling, what a surprise! We were just—" "Save it, Madeline," Victor cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. "I've heard enough on the drive over. You've gone too far this time." I exchanged a confused glance with Paul. How did Victor know what was happening? As if reading my mind, Victor turned to us. "I apologize for the intrusion, Harper, Paul. One of the staff called me, concerned about the commotion. It seems my wife has been causing quite a stir." Madeline's face flushed with anger. "How dare you undermine me like this, Victor? I was merely protecting our family's interests. Victor's eyes narrowed. By threatening to bankrupt our son and daughter-in-law? By treating this hotel like your personal playground? That's not protecting anyone's interests but your own, Madeline. I felt a surge of gratitude towards Victor, but it was quickly tempered by the realization that our fate still hung in the balance. The loan Madeline had mentioned still loomed over us like a guillotine. "Mr. Thompson," I began hesitantly, "I appreciate your intervention, but please call me Victor," he interrupted, his expression softening. "And I'm well aware of the loan situation, Harper. It's time we cleared the air about that." Paul stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion and hurt. "Dad, what's going on? What do you know about this loan?" Victor sighed heavily. "The loan your mother mentioned, it doesn't exist, at least not in the way she's implying." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Madeline's face drained of color. "Victor, don't you dare—" "Enough, Madeline," he said firmly. "It's time for the truth. The money we gave you and Harper to start this hotel was a gift, not a loan. We agreed on that from the beginning." I felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath me. All this time, the threat of financial ruin had been nothing but a bluff. Paul turned to his mother, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is this true? You lied about the loan?" Madeline's composure crumbled entirely. I only wanted to protect you, to make sure you had a safety net. This hotel, it's not the life I envisioned for you, Paul." "That wasn't your decision to make," Paul said, his voice hard. "You had no right to hold this over our heads, to try and manipulate us like this." I felt a surge of pride for my husband, seeing him stand up to his mother at last, but the relief was short-lived, as I realized we still had a mess to clean up. "Victor," I said, finding my voice at last, "I appreciate you clearing this up, but it doesn't change the fact that Madeline and her friends have run up a significant bill they're refusing to pay." Victor nodded grimly. "I'm well aware, and I assure you it will be paid in full, but I think there's a more fitting punishment for Madeline's behavior." He turned to his wife, his expression a mix of disappointment and determination. "Madeline, you're going to work off every cent of that bill right here in this hotel. Maybe then you'll gain some appreciation for the hard work Harper and Paul put in every day." Madeline's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. I won't debase myself by—" "You will," Victor said firmly, "or we'll be having a very serious discussion about our own financial arrangements when we get home." As Madeline sputtered in indignation, I caught Paul's eye. We'd won, in a sense, but at what cost? The revelations of the day had shaken the very foundation of our family, and I knew the real work was only just beginning. Standing there in the lobby, surrounded by the aftermath of Madeline's schemes, I realized we were at a crossroads. The next few days would determine not just the fate of our hotel, but the future of our entire family. And I wasn't sure if any of us were truly ready for what lay ahead. The first day of Madeline's employment at the hotel dawned bright and early. I stood in the lobby, a mixture of anticipation and dread churning in my stomach as I waited for her arrival. When she finally appeared, the transformation was startling. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair. Instead, Madeline wore the standard hotel uniform, her face bare of makeup, and her expression a mixture of defiance and resignation. "Well," she said stiffly, "where do you want me?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Let's start with housekeeping. We have a full house today, and the rooms need to be turned over quickly." As I led her through the daily routine, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at Madeline's obvious discomfort. But as the days wore on, something unexpected began to happen. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Madeline's attitude started to shift. The complaints became less frequent, replaced by a quiet determination. I caught her studying the other staff, asking questions, even offering suggestions for improvements. One evening, about a week into her sentence, I found Madeline in the kitchen long after her shift had ended. She was hunched over a pile of invoices, a look of concentration on her face. "Madeline," I asked, surprised, "what are you doing?" She looked up, a hint of embarrassment in her eyes. I noticed some discrepancies in our supply orders. I think we might be able to cut costs if we switch vendors for certain items." I was stunned. "You've been looking into our finances?" Madeline nodded, suddenly looking uncertain. "I hope I haven't overstepped. It's just—" I had no idea how much went into running this place, the attention to detail, the constant problem solving. It's impressive. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. This was a side of Madeline I'd never seen before. Thank you, I finally managed. I'd love to hear your ideas. As we pored over the numbers together, I felt a shift in the air between us. For the first time, we weren't adversaries. We were partners, working towards a common goal. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Madeline threw herself into her work with a passion that surprised us all. She charmed guests, streamlined operations, and even managed to bring in some of her high society connections as paying customers. On the final day of her employment, I found Madeline in the lobby, staring out at the sunset. She turned as I approached, and I was struck by the change in her. She looked softer somehow, more grounded. "Harper," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually." I shook my head. "Madeline, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "I've been horrible to you, to Paul, to everyone here. I was so caught up in my own ideas of success and status that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. This hotel, it's not just a business, it's a home, a family, and I'm ashamed that it took me this long to realize that." Tears pricked at my eyes as I listened to her words. "Thank you, Madeline. That means more than you know." She reached out, taking my hands in hers. "I know I have a lot to make up for, but if you'll let me, I'd like to be a part of this family. Really be a part of it, not just in name." At that moment, Paul appeared in the doorway, his eyes widening at the scene before him. I beckoned him over, and as he joined us, I felt a sense of completion I'd never experienced before. "I think," I said, looking between Madeline and Paul, "that we're all ready for a fresh start." As we stood there, the three of us linked by touch and newfound understanding, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating our enemies, but from transforming them into allies. Madeline's punishment had become a gift, not just for her, but for all of us. The hotel hummed with life around us, a testament to the hard work and love we'd poured into it. And as I looked towards the future, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together as a family.